Welcome to Brain Wellness, the podcast. I'm your host, Mandy NP. Each episode will bring you a new topic or interview related to brain health and wellness as part of my mission to help you on the path to a healthier, happier brain. So, let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Brain Wellness, the podcast. My guest today is Dr. Kyla Pearce. Dr. Kyla is a Senior Director of Programs, Research, and Operations at LoveYourBrain, a national nonprofit that delivers evidence-based holistic health programs for TBI, concussion, and caregivers. As a researcher and yoga and mindfulness teacher, she oversees the design, implementation, and evaluation of LoveYourBrain's programs on a large scale. She has trained over 3,000 clinicians, yoga teachers, people with brain injury, and caregivers in how to adapt yoga, mindfulness, and psychoeducation for brain injury. She has developed a range of TBI-specific evidence-based yoga and mindfulness program and integrated them into over 60 community and over 30 clinical contexts and online. She recently completed an NIH Postdoctoral Research Fellowship at Dartmouth College, investigating the impact of yoga and meditation for people with neurological conditions, including traumatic brain injury, and has published in several peer-reviewed scientific journals on these topics. Thank you so much for joining me today, Kyla.
Thank you for having me, Mandy. And to your listeners, really appreciate you letting me be here today.
Yeah. So as I was saying before we hit record, I had known your brother-in-law's story a little bit, and so possibly we'll talk about that a little bit today. But it was so nice meeting you in DC at the brain injury conference, and I loved starting off the day with a little mindfulness session because that was so much needed that day.
Yeah, there's a lot of energy, a lot happening on the hill. So glad that I could help support a little moment of pause for everybody.
Yes, much needed. So I always like to start off with my first question, just how did you get to where you are today? Like you have a very impressive bio, but how did we get to Dr. Kyla as you are today?
Oh my gosh. Well, that could take the whole time here. So oh, I'd say my path has been quite circuitous. But I think some of the most salient ways in which I got wrapped up into the Love Your Brain, my role here, as well as being within the Love Your Brain, sorry, broader brain injury community. So my brother-in-law, who you mentioned, Kevin Pierce, was a professional snowboarder and about 15 years ago suffered a very significant accident right before the Winter Olympics. He experienced a traumatic brain injury, and at the time I was dating his brother, Adam Pierce, and really sent our family in a very different direction. At that point, we had never heard of what traumatic brain injury was. So got pivoted a bit in my career, which was focused on women's reproductive health, as well as a yoga practitioner, but got swept into the world of brain injury rather unexpectedly. And through what I'm sure we'll talk about maybe more later, really realized a tremendous need for supporting people impacted by brain injury, caregivers, as well as people with lived experience to access holistic health programs rooted in yoga and mindfulness. And so I was fortunate to have a background as a practitioner. I was actually doing my yoga teacher training at the time of Love Your Brain's kind of initial founding, and was also doing my MPH, my master's of public health at the time at Dartmouth. So I had kind of a research space, a practice space, as well as um, a kind of real interest in leveraging our family's tragedy for something really positive. And that's what got me into Love Your Brain and lived kind of parallel lives for a while, working in women's health, but then also in yoga for brain injury. And since then have really dedicated my life to being a lifelong learner, as well as building programs that are hopefully making people's lives a little bit easier.
Yeah, that's quite a shift going from women's health to brain injury.
And there was a lot of parallels that I think there's some related kind of stigma and lack of understanding around women's reproductive health that is shared to some extent in the brain injury community, a lot of invisibility about the injury and kind of stigma in the mainstream society. So felt like a lot of the kind of purpose that I had within that community translated very well to why I care about supporting people with brain injury, and was very lucky to kind of fall into a really supportive research team at Dartmouth who was able to help alongside of my dissertation work in women's reproductive health, also conduct some research looking at the effects of yoga and meditation for brain injury that really have served as the bedrock of our programs now.
Yeah. Can you share a couple of things that you learned along the your research in there that really kind of have stuck out to you, maybe a little bit more than others?
Sure. Yeah, I think so in the early stages of Love Your Brain, when we were really trying to figure out what is this organization going to do? What are we uniquely set up to support um, and didn't want to reinvent the wheel by any means. So we're looking at other organizations or yoga teachers that were offering scalable yoga-based programming for people with brain injury that really supported how to adapt the program for the complexity of brain injury and concussion. I didn't find anything on a large scale, at least. So when we conducted our first pilot evaluation, which was a pre-post assessment, so we offered an 8-week yoga and mindfulness program and looked at changes in scores from before and after. About 31 individuals participated in the yoga program versus a control group. And I won't get into the weeds of it, but the main learning that was very interesting for us was, so at that point, we did not have any group discussion or formal community building component to the program. It was just focused on movement as well as practices for supporting self-regulation through breath work and meditation. But at the end of every class, participants naturally wanted to stay and have conversation and really connect with people in a more meaningful way. And that then was woven into our formal curriculum. So we really use participants' experience in our first kind of like bedrock study to develop the curriculum. And I think, and I'm curious what you think about this too, but when there's such a dramatic life shift that happens with brain injury, our work is really centered on how to build internal resources. And that's why yoga and meditation can be so helpful because you're bringing your awareness inward, but then also, of course, building and rebuilding a sense of community and belonging when people are uh, navigating the uncertainty that happens with brain injury. And so that inward and outward connection has really then been woven in all of our programming since. So that was one kind of takeaway that informed how we do our work.
Mhm.
And I can share some others, but I'll kind of pause there.
Yeah, that's to kind of speak to that part of the brain injured side of things. Having been through the recovery myself from my own accident a couple of years ago, it's really important to seek that kind of silence in yourself and be able to regulate.
Mm.
So I love that you mentioned the whole self-regulation part of it because that is huge. There's a lot of autonomic dysfunction. So the autonomic nervous system gets kind of thrown for a loop. And it's really difficult to regulate yourself a lot, regulate your emotions, your temperature, ability, all of the things get very difficult to manage. And if you're not taking some time for yourself in there, it just makes it that much harder to recover. And that's one thing that I say to my patients all the time too, is you have to be able to do things like mindfulness and meditation. And I never really saw it before my own accident because I never
Mm.
took the time to do it. I didn't listen to my body. I pushed myself entirely too hard prior to. But now, having gone through all this, I see the importance in myself. So it's easier to help other people understand the importance also. If that makes sense. Just
Yeah.
just because
Oh,
I've lived the
absolutely.
experience now. So yeah.
Yeah. And certainly we live in a culture that really prioritizes productivity and kind of pushing and certainly, at least in our experience in kind of Kevin's early healing process, importantly, there's different external benchmarks set for what progress looks like. And that can really take you into more of a headspace of I need to achieve this type of progress or next step to feel a sense of progress. But when there's an opportunity to pause and really tune into how you are feeling internally, that also builds a greater sense of agency to measure um, kind of healing in a more nuanced way that's not just tied to kind of more standard medical improvements.
Mhm.
So it's, yes, a both and for sure, but bringing in the awareness is really, really essential.
Yeah. So I think that kind of segues into the next question I wanted to ask you about kind of that resilience part of it. You kind of touched on it. It's not really recovery, it's healing. So what's the difference from your perspective?
Yeah, well, we organizationally have really, so a few things. We see this term resilience as much more reflective of the healing process after a brain injury, knowing that it's chronic, it impacts many aspects of functioning in a long-term way. What do I mean by resilience? We use a framework developed by two researchers from the VA, Dennis Stephen Southwick and Dennis Charney. They wrote a book called Resilience, the Science of Mastering Life's Greatest Challenges. And in their work, they interviewed many people who had experienced different types of complex trauma and identified 10 factors that individuals who had been able to move through their adversity and find a way forward embodied. And so all of our work really centers on and is themed around parts of these 10 factors. And why this is helpful is if you think about it, recovery makes a lot of sense in certain contexts where, you break your arm, you typically put a cast on, you return to kind of original functioning. So recovery has more of a past orientation, trying to get back to how things once were. And that can be very motivating in the early stages, post concussion or post brain injury. And it certainly was in our experience with Kevin. He really wanted to recover and return to being a professional athlete. Your identity changes, the things that you felt most fulfilled by um, can be a tool to help motivate you to try and get back and recover. And at some point, and I'm curious about your experience, that narrative no longer serves and also can create more confusion and frustration for the individual as well as for family members who have this expectation that somebody's going to get back to who they were before. So we're very delicate around typically using more resilience as the framing for the healing process instead of recovery, but also recognize the value of that framework at certain parts in the healing process. So maybe I'll pause there and see how that's landing for you.
Yeah, yeah. Eagle has definitely landed on that one. I struggled for a long time because I wanted to get back to where I was. I was the breadwinner of our family as a nurse practitioner, and being off of work as long as I was, and I'm just now getting back to part-time work as a nurse practitioner 2 years later. So it's been a long process to get to where I am. But there were times that I didn't know if I was going to get here. And the longer things went on, the harder it got to think about the fact that I wanted to get back there. I wanted to get back there so badly. I was pushing myself to the point where it was actually slowing down my recovery because I was pushing so
Mm,
hard to try to get back to that point. And it took a lot of work with multiple different therapists and conversations with close friends to realize that, you know what? What am I trying to get back to? And I just talked about this
mm,
as a guest on a different show as well. I was working full time, and I had a couple part-time jobs, and I had my podcast, and I was training for a marathon, and I have kids at home and a family, and I was doing all the things and never really taking time for anything else. And I finally got to the conclusion that I don't want to get back to that level of busyness. So getting back to that is not really a good goal. Wanted to get back
mm,
to being a nurse practitioner, but I didn't know what that was going to look like either. So I've had to take shifts in my thought process of what my future is actually going to look like, and it gave me time to really take stock and what do I want it to look like. So I
mm,
had that time to reflect where that looking trying to get back to that was no longer serving me, but trying to get
mm.
to a better future, that was my new goal.
and that's not, I mean, it's not an easy
No.
process. And you can't rush it. And people are on different timelines for that reevaluating. Mm. I think also what I hear from what you share, and we talk about this too in our work, is it's sometimes less about the thing itself, but more about the feeling that you get while doing it. So, for instance, we have a lot of programming for athletes who have experienced brain injury and can no longer return to play in the sport that they love. So, what is another way of feeling that sense of kind of adrenaline or motivation or kind of rush of physical ability that may not be channeled in that specific um, category, but in another way? And yeah, there's a lot of interesting research showing that when we frame challenge and adversity through this lens of resilience, it's much more empowering and allows people to meet themselves really where they're at moment to moment and see that their identity is not tied to how things used to be. But all of us, we want to be in control of our lives. Like that brings us a sense of safety and normalcy and purpose. And but what a skill, because nothing is really ultimately in our control. So to have that really like deep inner reckoning around life is full of change. So how to meet and constantly find a new normal is a skill that we all need, and just happens in a really fast-paced way for after
Yeah.
brain injury.
Yeah. Yeah. It was not a change that I would have consciously made if I would have had the opportunity to do it on my own without an accident. But getting
Mm,
back into practice now, I am focused on concussion. Like that is my new passion in life. And I worked in stroke neurology prior to it, and now it's a different kind of brain injury, but it's still a brain injury. But I'm finding that I'm much more passionate about this than I ever have been anything in my career
mm,
before. But that sense of self, I was very tied to my identity as a nurse practitioner, and I didn't realize it until I couldn't do it. And then so that
mm,
loss of self was huge for a long time. So to your point of wanting to do something to feel that same way, being I was hospital based before and now I'm clinic based. And I never thought I was going to be okay with that. But I love seeing my patients in clinic right now. And I love feeling like I'm doing something to help the world of concussion.
mm, mm. And I think also what's coming up for me too is, and one of the reasons mindfulness and yoga can be so helpful in this process is it teaches us how to feel two kind of opposite feelings at the same time. So there can be both a sense of loss for how things once were, and that's a normal, understandable feeling, while also at the same time feeling a sense of meaning and possibility in new conditions and circumstances that you're choosing. So how to feel that sense of integration and not have things be so linear,
Mhm.
which is, yeah, an ever-evolving process.
Yeah.
Mm.
So that brings me to the whole idea of yoga and mindfulness. Why is it so beneficial to TBI? You've done a lot of research on this. Why is it so beneficial for brain healing?
Mm. Well, there's a couple different ways we can approach this question. I think sometimes a little experiential exercise can be helpful. This is sometimes something that we do actually with clinicians when we're teaching them about why the mind-body connection, like what the mind-body connection is and why it's helpful. So we could potentially do this right now if you're up for it.
Yeah.
And so I think a little context, knowing after concussion and brain injury, some of the most common symptoms are mental health challenges. So we know about 1 in 2 people experience anxiety, depression, or emotional dysregulation, like cognitive impacts, memory and information processing. So cognitive fatigue, trying to pay attention is so challenging. And then social impacts, so feeling a sense of isolation, huge. And then, of course, physical impacts, so balance and sometimes vestibular issues as well. And then, of course, autonomic nervous system dysregulation. So, all of those complexities, um, one of the real values of a practice like yoga, which is essentially mindfulness in motion, so, a practice where you're paying attention moment to moment with a quality of curiosity instead of judgment. Um, that rebuilds mind-body connection, which is so often interrupted after brain injury. So one way of talking about what does really mind-body connection mean, people always talk about this, is this little exercise. So what I'll do is lead a brief visualization, and then we can just talk about what that means. So what I'll invite, and if you're listening to this in the car, maybe don't close your eyes, but we'll invite you to imagine that you are moving into your kitchen. You look around your space and you see some familiar objects. You see a refrigerator, you see your stove, you see a countertop with a bowl of beautiful yellow lemons. You approach this bowl of lemons and grab the biggest, most yellow, shiny, juiciest lemon. Feel its smooth skin. And then imagine yourself taking this lemon and putting it on a cutting board. You reach for a knife and begin to slice this lemon in half. You imagine the juice of the lemon beginning to spray out. And then slowly reaching towards the lemon, you bring it up towards your nose and take a slow, deep breath in, the scent of the lemon absorbing into your nose and throat. And then slowly bring the half of the lemon up towards your lips. And then begin to open your mouth and slowly sink your teeth into the lemon, the juice, the sharp, bright juice of the lemon moving into your throat and down into your belly. And then just notice for a moment if there's any sensations you can feel in your mouth or throat or anywhere else. Okay, so we can come back and typically when we're doing this in a setting where people are really either closing their eyes or focusing on the visualization, you notice sensations like salivating or like a tightening in your jaw. I don't know if you noticed anything as you were listening or imagining.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Okay,
I
so
remember
this
this exercise from
idea,
DC as well.
okay, we did it there. Okay, great.
Yep.
Yes, so then this idea that, of course, what we think. So in that exercise, just visualizing the lemon initiated a physiologic response. Normally, yeah, there's sensations in the mouth. So this idea that what we think impacts how we feel. So that's, we all intuitively know that, but that's a way to really embody it. And so with yoga, a lot of what we're doing is noticing first mental patterns in the mind. And after brain injury, there can be an amplification of ruminating thought patterns. I can't do this right. This is different than how things used to be. I'm never going to get back to the person that I want to be. So that just really like a spiraling of negative thinking. And with practices that bring awareness to mental patterns, of course, that's having an impact on how we feel physically. So, how to bring in different tools to bring awareness and interrupt those negative thought patterns and shift our thinking to something more supportive. So that's kind of mind-body connection. And then, of course, body to mind. So how we feel physically also impacts how we feel mentally. So movement patterns can certainly help rebuild a sense of balance, can help with reducing cognitive fatigue. And I think it's helpful to kind of think about that framing of both working at the physical level and then also working at the mental level and how that helps with the integration.
Yeah, yeah. I love that exercise because you do like feel all the feels. And that's one thing I've noticed since my injury too, is that whatever feeling I have, it's 100% there. So like even as you were saying, to feel the skin of the lemon, like I can feel it on my fingertips. It's really bizarre how concrete those sensations can actually be when you're thinking about them. And I remember years ago in the stroke world, we were talking about how you can use like imagery to help you heal because you can imagine yourself doing things and that connects to those same kind of nerve endings to try to retrain different things. So even if you can imagine yourself doing it, at some point those muscle fibers start to work because the nerves have been utilized in that thinking process. Kind of that same way that when you're thinking about how you salivate with just thinking about a lemon, imagine what your body can do as you're trying to retrain it to do different things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of interesting research that shows mental practice can improve motor functioning in if someone has hemiparesis, for instance, after a stroke or TBI, that can improve motor functioning. And exactly the neuroplasticity, since if you think about any sort of voluntary movement requires a neural impulse to then impact the motor functioning. So the visualization is activating different parts of the brain that are then tied to that functioning. So
Mhm.
there's a lot of also interesting research led by Dr. Goth, who's examined different neuroimaging studies looking at yoga practice. This is in the general population, but also certainly has implication for people who have injury to the brain that supports um, that shows that there can be significant changes in the structure and therefore also functioning of different parts of the brain associated with memory, emotional dysregulation, cognition. And so that's been exciting to see on a neuroscience perspective. And then I can share a little bit about our research at some point. But um, yeah, it's been exciting to see the first randomized control trial of any yoga study was conducted in 1975 and wasn't until 2012 for people with brain injury. So it's still a relatively kind of burgeoning field, although of course yoga and mindfulness are multiple thousands of years old wisdom traditions. So it's the science is just catching up.
Yeah. So I'm a nerd and I love the research, but I do have a question that I want to ask before I forget it again. When you're dealing with yoga with somebody with a brain injury, there's a lot of balance issues. I tried doing yoga shortly after my injury and I couldn't because of the whole getting up and down and into positions, and that threw me for a loop. So I've not really gotten back into it, and I used to love doing yoga. How can you modify yoga for somebody that might have issues with position changes and balance, things like that?
Yeah, it's such a good question, and this comes up a lot in our programming for both for kind of POTS reasons or vestibular issues. So there's a few things you can, of course, practice using a chair so that that limits any of the up-down movement. Also structuring if someone has mobility where they can transition from floor to standing to structure a class so that you chunk it so that the first section is on the floor, then to all fours, then to standing, and then back down instead of, so really minimizing the up down movement. There's also ways of adding additional breath to help the nervous system regulate kind of midway through a transition from, for instance, being on all fours all the way to standing. Um, there's also ways we call, I think in the PT world, this is called anticipatory postural movement. We call them cognitive preparation cues, but essentially slowing down the pace of movement. So, for instance, if I wanted to transition from the floor to standing and was in all fours, instead of instructing immediately, step your foot forward, I would first say, notice your right leg, the texture of the mat under your knee. As you're ready, step your foot forward. So it brings your attention to the part of the body first and then slows the movement pattern. That can sometimes be helpful for minimizing dizziness or, yeah, challenges with blood pressure regulation. So those are some examples.
Mhm. I love that. Yeah, I used to love doing yoga, and I love the faster paced movements. I just haven't been able to get back into it. And I know I'm not the only one after a brain injury. So there's
Yeah, and so many people who come to our programs are, so we have some complete beginners, but we have a lot of people who used to have a very consistent practice and then are coming back to learn different modifications so that it's accessible again. Knowing, and I always I am also someone who early in my yoga kind of practice journey really appreciated faster paced flow, the more kind of fitness oriented yoga, which felt really good. I practice hot yoga classes, so there's definitely value and a place for that. And also from this place of after brain injury, some of the benefits of yoga, really rebuilding interoception. So the knowing of how you're feeling internally, which can often be interrupted. Slower movement is actually better for enhancing neuroplasticity because you're forced to actually pay more attention instead of just going through the movement patterns. So if you're really cued to notice the sensations of clothing along your skin, or how does it feel to move a little more slowly as you raise your arms up towards the sky, feeling every movement as you do this. I mean, you're already more paying attention to what's happening, and that leads to greater neuroplastic changes in your brain, and therefore supports healing more so than returning to a fast-paced flow.
Yeah.
So different also really has a lot of benefits and is harder in
Yeah.
some ways.
Yeah, I've noticed that in some different workouts that I've done when you move more slowly, it is harder because you're really focusing on the muscle movement. But yeah, there was a fitness place by us that used to do a class called Warrior Sculpt, which was like a hot strength yoga. So yoga in a hot room with weights, and I loved it. And there's no way that I could do that now, currently at least. So yeah, slower pace might be better.
And there's still ways, I know in different also concussion recovery protocols, having some aerobic exercise that's, sub symptom threshold early on is important. And so yoga can be made an aerobic exercise, but yeah, would just need to be titrated with each individual. So our group-based classes are much more around how to rebuild a sense of interoception, so understanding how one feels internally through movement, through breath work, and through meditation.
Mhm. I love that. All right, so getting back to the nerdy part of things, I love that you're able to continue doing the research. What are some of the other things you've done as part of research of Love Your Brain for research?
So we're really proud that we have published the largest studies examining the effectiveness of yoga for brain injury, both in community-based settings as well as online. So our kind of two flagship studies we did in collaboration with University of North Carolina, UNC, as well as Dartmouth. And one of them was an evaluation of the Love Your Brain yoga program, which involved partnering with yoga studios at at the height of our program in 35 states throughout the US, as well as 10 Canadian provinces. And we evaluated anyone who participated in a Love Your Brain yoga program over a 2-year period. And this study included about 1,500 people with concussion to moderate and severe TBI, as well as caregivers. And we asked them to rate different um, valid scales for measuring aspects of quality of life. We looked at overall quality of life. We also looked at emotional behavioral dysregulation, positive affect or mood, resilience, cognition, and yeah, those were the main 5 outcomes. And what we found was that there was significant improvement in 4 out of the 5 outcomes after participating in a Love Your Brain yoga program. So what we kind of took from that is people report feeling better mentally, physically, and socially. And also caregivers through qualitative evaluation share that they felt better able to regulate their own emotions, felt a greater sense of belonging. So a lot, it was very reinforcing that you can offer a scalable yoga-based program in many different settings that shows benefit. So that was, yeah, the largest study that's been published in community settings. And then we also, during the pandemic, had to move our Love Your Brain yoga program online. We call that Love Your Brain Mindset. And it's a similar 6-week program. Everything is free for people with different types of acquired brain injury and caregivers. And we did an evaluation that also looked at over about a year and a half with about 1,300 individuals, similar outcomes. Were there improvements in quality of life, resilience, positive affect, emotional dysregulation, um, and cognition, and found all 5 outcomes. People self-reported significant improvement. So certainly some limitations of the studies. There was no control group. There weren't randomized, so some selection bias. But in terms of uh, findings that are generalizable to what happens in the real world. So these are large studies, large samples in the real world, there's a lot of some promising results that if you're looking for programs that really support attention, nervous system regulation, balance, and community building, going to one of these programs may help.
Mhm. And I'm sure, like with anything else in the injury world, when you find something that's specific to what you're recovering from, it's going to be better than something that's generic for the regular population.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really think that group discussion piece that we added on from our early research adds that real sense of like, this is for me. This is built for me. I'm connecting with people who can be resources as well as validate what I'm going through, which is not what the medical system is set up for. I mean, of course, the medical system is really good at different evidence-based treatment, speech OT, PT, but not the real kind of mental and social well-being that happens in a group-based setting.
Mhm. I think where the typical medical realm is missing is that yes, they're going by evidence-based medicine, but it's not the evidence that shows up in things outside of the New England Journal of Medicine. It's
Mm,
it's the evidence that they were taught in school that's kind of what they stick with. I've been blessed in that I've always been a curious person and I keep looking for other things outside of what I was taught in school because yeah, I had a pretty good robust training, but it's everything that I've learned since then about even nutrition. We had very minimal nutrition in nursing school and nurse practitioner. So everything that I've learned that I teach my patients was taught outside of that. So looking at
mm,
other research that's out there other than what we were shown in school. So I think that's one thing that I always try to encourage to any of the providers that are listening is to remember to open your mind to look at things outside of the mainstream journals because as you were just talking about, you guys have done all this research. The research is there. It's definitely evidence-based, but is it the evidence that most practitioners are looking at? Probably not.
Such a good point. And your patients are lucky that you have that kind of can hold multiple perspectives of what's valuable. And certainly the movement towards more kind of person-centered medicine that really takes each individual's unique characteristics and goals requires thinking outside the box often.
Mhm. Yeah. But as I've learned from one of my new friends up in Canada, it's not outside the box anymore. It's just a bigger toolbox.
Oh, I love that.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, so this is one of those things we would also call complementary therapy instead of alternative therapy because we used to use that word alternative all the time, and people thought, well, it's not as good as the mainstream things. Then no, it's complementary. It's there, it helps, and they all work together. So nothing works
Mhm.
in a silo.
Absolutely. And also to that point, one of the reasons why yoga as a practice is potentially beneficial is that it is holistic, working physically, mentally, cognitively at the same time, where a lot of traditional medicine is so siloed
Mhm.
and kind of fails to take into consideration how to do two things at once to really bolster things together.
Mhm. Yeah. You said it at the beginning, it's moving mindfulness. And I love that idea that you can get movement and mindfulness done at the same time because we always think that we have to do one thing for each of those. And you can
Mm,
you can do more than one thing.
yeah, definitely.
Do you guys have any upcoming projects or anything that you'd like to kind of promote from Love Your Brain standpoint?
Well, I think so. Our programs are free and offered year round. I think right now we have, I talked a little bit about our Love Your Brain Mindset program that's offered actually every quarter. So our next round of programs will be opening for July in a couple weeks. So that's essentially a kind of 2.0 version of a peer support group with a curriculum that is based on the growth versus fixed mindset developed by Carol Dweck. So touches on what is resilience, what's mindfulness, what's realistic optimism, how to use gratitude in a way that doesn't dismiss feeling lost about things, but also finding sources of joy and meaning throughout challenge. So there's a set curriculum that our groups are kind of guided by from a Love Your Brain training facilitator, and then also people can access a pathway that includes live yoga classes if they want more physical exercise. So that's coming up, and then We also have a retreat program that is a 5-day wellness retreat that blends mindfulness, gentle yoga, brain health nutrition, some creative expression, art therapy exercises, and then a real deep sense of how to build lasting relationships and community connection. So those are happening in Arizona and Colorado and are actually open for registration now. And again, are free and are really powerful experiences for supporting emotional resilience and furthering the healing process.
Very cool. How can people find you guys to learn more about any of these programs that you offer?
Our website's the best place, so it's loveyourbrain.com. We also are on Instagram and Facebook, and all of our program registration happens on our website. So feel free to check us out there, sign up for our newsletter, which we send out with open enrollment for our programs, as well as other kind of fun events and campaigns. We have also some trainings for health professionals. I know you said some of your listeners are clinicians, maybe also some yoga teachers, who knows? But we also offer certification level trainings and how to adapt different aspects of yoga, so breathwork, meditation, and the physical practice for different types of brain injury, as well as learn our curricula so that you can really integrate curricula within different contexts so that we're expanding access within clinical as well as community spaces to these practices.
I love that. That's awesome. As we wrap up here today, and again, I'm so thankful that you're here to join me today. Do you have any last words of wisdom that you'd like to share with our listeners before we close?
Hmm. I think a big piece of the healing process, at least from our family and through our work, is learning how to trust yourself again and no kind of words of how to do that, but just letting that be um, an anchor that it's possible and you deserve to trust yourself through change. And the hardship and the darkness is actually something that will fuel a deeper self-understanding and deeper trust. It may take a little while to get there, but that is such a source of power that hope people feel as a real source of inner resilience and know that Love Your Brain hopefully can be a way of nurturing that and supporting, and look forward to, yeah, hopefully staying connected and in touch with folks. Feel free to reach out at any point.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here today, Kyla.
Thank you for having me, Mandy.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Brain Wellness, the podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, I encourage you to subscribe, like, and share this with others to help me continue on with my mission to help people live healthier, happier lives. Go to www.brainwellnesssolutions.com to see what I'm up to and get links to all the social medias there. See you next time.